What's up and welcome to the Single Player Experience. I'm your host Sebastion Malden, and today's episode, we're focusing on retro games. I said we because I decided to bring in a heavy hitter for this subject. My guest today is Dot Eater's own, Bill Hunter. Bill is the perfect guest for this subject because he runs the Dot Eater's website, which chronicles the history and progression of video games. In this episode, Bill is going to talk about his favorite single-player games and the retro games he thinks you should check out. So, if you're a single-player gamer who's looking for some good retro games to check out, then this is the right episode for you. So, without further ado, let's start the show. DJ, hit the beat. This is the Single Player Experience, the podcast that helps single-player gamers manage their video game backlog. I'm your host, Sebastion Malden, and my main quest is to help you manage your ever-growing video game backlog by letting you know which single-player games are worth your time and money so that you can have the best single-player experience. Now, without further ado, let's start the show. DJ, cut the beat. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said in the intro, we have a very special guest with us today. He's from the Hunter Wick YouTube channel and the Dot Eaters website, where you can find a whole lot of retro games that you should definitely check out. This is the one, the only, William Hunter. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Sebastion. Thanks for having me.
Man, thank you for being on the show. So before we begin, though, can you introduce yourself to the audience for the people who may not know you?
Right. Well, like you said, I run a website called The Dot Eaters. It's a early history of video games ranging from systems that were in existence before Pong all the way up until about the Nintendo Entertainment System. And then I also have a section on computer games too. So everything like from mainframe games up into when Electronic Arts was founded.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So with that long list of history there, I'm very curious. What is your top 5 games of all time?
Right. Well, I don't know if you can see it on my. I guess you can't see it on the audio, but I have my Zork shirt on. So
that's cool.
Definitely, I think Zork was probably the first game I ever purchased on a floppy, on the 5 1/4 inch floppy, and for my Commodore 64. And so adventure games like Zork and the Sierra graphic adventures and stuff like that were, big influences on me being a gamer through my life. So I'd have to say Zork for a computer. Also, Mule was a great game. It was like a strategy game. You'd all sit at the same computer. 2 people would be on the joysticks, and then the 2 other people would have either side of the keyboard to play with. And you're on a planet and you're trying to grow crops and get energy from the sun. And you're trying to make enough money that at the end of the rounds, you've got enough to survive on this planet.
Oh,
And
that's
then
dope.
there was an auction section where you'd the stuff you grow, you'd sell it to the other colonists, and you're trying to get the highest money, and everyone's trying to pay the lowest amount for it. And it's you're yelling at each other and screwing each other over and stuff. It was a lot of fun. So Zork, Mule, in the arcades, I think the game I played the most was Elevator Action, which was
I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, it's you're a spy that's trying to infiltrate this building, and you're going up and down elevators, and there's little stairs you walk up and down, and there's all these doors in each floor, and the enemy pops out of the doors and they shoot at you, and you can duck or jump or shoot them. And you're trying to make your way, and then it gets diabolical, the design of it. And then I put some modern stuff in there too. The GTA games are just amazing.
They really are.
It's a kind of a cliche now that if you're a gamer, you're playing GTA, but I still love those games, and I love the worlds they build that you're playing, and it's like a big sandbox where everything reacts to what you do, and it's really kind of amazing. And then, what's that, 3? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that's
But
3.
you know what? A game I want to mention that really, really impressed me is, I don't know if you ever played it, it's Death Stranding.
Yeah.
It's
Hideo Kojima.
Yeah, except Kojima's latest. I think he's announced another one, I think. But Death Stranding is an amazing game. It's just amazing. It's astounding to play because it is bonkers. It is
It really is.
completely insane, what you're doing in the world. And it's really more or less, you're just, the big joke about online role-playing games is like FedEx missions where you're some guy says, you take a mission and you go, okay, here, fetch quest. Here, take this and take it there. And that's really what Death Stranding is. The whole thing is just you're delivering shit. But it's amazing, just the world they build and just how balls to the wall Kojima was when he made this. He didn't compromise anything. It just like, this is like take the craziest ideas I'm going to put in a game, and then it's a pretty cohesive, enjoyable game to play in itself. The gameplay is kind of cool. So I definitely have to mark that. It's a great one. And then most recent one is probably Horizon Forbidden West, which was
love it,
an astounding game.
Absolutely love it. So that's a strong list there. A lot of diversity there as far as like,
it's geared on the retro side because, I still use emulators and play all these games, and I have a pretty good collection of the consoles themselves. But, so it's heavy on the retro side, but I love modern gaming too. I'm a gamer through and through, I guess.
Yeah. Before we dive deep into some of your recommendations for gaming, let's talk about you. What inspired you to create the website and to really hone in on the retro games side of the fence?
Right. Well, way back in the late 90s, there was a series of documentaries about, one was called Triumph of the Nerds, which was sort of about the building of the tech industry, like how it started, like the invention of the personal computer pretty much, and all the different companies that built up around that. And just the crazy personalities like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all these other people. And then they did a sequel to that called, can't remember the second one. I think it was 2.0, the same thing, but 2.0. And it was all about the online systems that were built up around it too. And it just fascinated me so much, all this history of the personal computer and the online internet is, and at the same time that I watched those documentaries, there were these, I got into MAME, the multiple arcade machine emulator program, and just the thousands of arcade games that this thing emulated, right? And so I started playing these arcade games that I had played when I was a kid, and the two kind of meshed, like when I was playing these games, I wanted to know more information about how they were made and who made them. And at the time, there was maybe 2 websites that were dedicated to the history of video games, and they weren't really sort of comprehensive as I wanted. So I thought, well, I'll just start my own. And so I started researching and reaching out to people and writing articles. And I think I might be even over the 25th anniversary of the site. I started it in 1998. So.
Oh, that's really cool.
Do the math.
That's really cool. Congratulations on the longevity there.
Thanks.
So that is really cool. So over the years, you've played tons of games, whether it be like, emulation or on modern day consoles. What games do you really think like are the best single player experiences that people can have? Like, what are the best single player games that people can play?
Right. Well, it's funny. The gaming industry, of course, started as single player games, and it was super rare to have anything online. Right. I just remember living through this time where you started to see in the late 80s with games. I think the first game I probably ever played online was Populous by Peter Molyneux and Bullfrog Games. It was an amazing game, one of the first God games. Like now you have SimCity and all this other stuff, but these were sort of the guys that started it. And there was an online component, and it was super rare. Like at that time, I was like, wow, you could play online with other people. Of course, the modem. At like, whatever it was, 4K or whatever. But, and it became more and more like a part of the game that had to be there. And then it became the thrust of video games was online play. Right. And it was just an amazing arc to see that it became something so rare to something that was always included to something that had to be there. And I just think that progression of technology was really fascinating to me that it got so popular.
It is.
Right. But single player games, I still love those too. Like, I don't know. I don't want to slag the online community too much or gaming community too much, but there's a super lot of griefing. And if you're not, the top tier player, if you can't dedicate, hours and hours and hours, just hundreds of hours to get really good at these games, then you kind of get smoked while you're playing them, or people, like give you shit or whatever. So it's always good to go back and play a single player game. And I don't know, like I was mentioning Death Stranding. That's got a really neat online component where you're never really facing off with other people, but what you do in the world, what you build in the world helps other people, right? Like if you put up a ladder to climb up a cliff, or you put a rope to climb down a cliff, or you build a bridge, or you help pave a road, then what you've done impacts other players. And I think that's really cool. That's a really nice balance between the actions and reactions in the game actually affect other people without kind of a confrontation aspect of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's almost the equivalent of like, you know, when you go to like a restaurant or a fast food place like McDonald's and you're in the drive-through and you get up to the account, like the window, and you hear the lady or the guy say like, "Hey, the person in front of you already paid for you, and would you like to pay it back like to the next person?" So it's almost a video game equivalent of that.
And it's nice in Death Stranding too, because when you get a feedback because other people give you likes, and it kind of increases your stature and gives you sort of more power in the game.
It's a really cool thing. Like one of the reasons like I created this podcast, a single player experience, was because like I really wanted to highlight single player games because I feel like they're almost overshadowed in a world that's becoming extremely multiplayer, so to speak. And it's almost that single player experience is almost like reading a book, you know, like these people crafted a world like specifically for you to immerse yourself in rather than you to compete in more so, or like rather than like you to have this community experience. It's almost like you're enjoying a show, so like on Netflix or something like that. So I think Death Stranding is a really cool like mixture of a like multiplayer features in a single player game.
Right. And the other one I'd say is Horizon Forbidden West and Zero Dawn before it were really amazing single player games. A great experience because you're by yourself in the game playing, but you're in this world, right? That's one thing I find that's really fascinating me about gaming. Like what I find really fascinating about gaming is the world building, if they do it really well. And it's like games like GTA where they build this city, and as you kind of go crazy in it, causing all this mayhem, the world reacts around you in a pretty, you know, it's sometimes over the top, but it's also sort of, it feels very real. Like this is the kind of thing that would happen if you pull out a machine gun and start blasting away in an intersection. People yell and scream, and you know, like cars start veering off all over the place. And it's like your action causes a really hilarious and kind of almost real reaction.
It really does.
And the world they built in Horizon Forbidden West and Zero Dawn, those are amazing worlds, and it's a great story. And Aloy is a really amazing character. Right?
She really is. I don't think she gets enough credit for how like really cool and layered she is as a character. I know.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
It's almost that she is the equivalent of a main character of a really in-depth sci-fi movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. Another thing, mentioning that, another great single player experience is of course the Mass Effect games. Which are amazing. I don't know if you're a Trekkie or not, but the Mass Effect games to me always feel like the best Star Trek games that were never made as Star Trek games, right?
I can see that.
It's a world where humanity is like trying to do its best, it's trying to improve itself, it's reaching out into the wider galaxy and just trying to do it the best it can. And just the things they have to kind of fight against and the allies they have to make and the sacrifices they have to make. It's like they're amazing games.
They really are. I am so excited to see what the next generation of Mass Effect is going to be like.
Yeah.
I am really excited. But yeah, I think I don't know if you played the Legendary Edition that just came out recently, but like such a
I'm sort of working my way through it.
Yeah, it is meaty. It is very meaty. I've recently I played through the first one and now I'm back on Mass Effect 2, and that's the one I really have to take care of, as so to speak, and really nurture my relationships with other people, because like as you know, playing those games, that really has like dire consequences.
Yeah, for sure. And Mass Effect 1, I never played it. I started with 2. So I sort of worked my way through it. I was like, that's a little bit of a slog, but Mass Effect 2 is where the series really started to sing, I think.
I always feel like Mass Effect 1, while the story is good, always felt like a prologue of game mechanics where like, they tried a lot of things to see what would stick. And then Mass Effect 2 is where I feel like they really nailed this is what the series should be like.
Yeah. Yeah. The combat is much better in the second one going forward.
For sure. And it feels like that, like 2 and 3 feels like a modern day game, but like 1 feels like a game that was a generation prior to it.
Yeah. Exactly.
It really does. It really does. So, do you have any other modern recommendations that you think people should check out, especially single player gamers?
No, I don't think so. I think that's it.
I think that's a strong list, though. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's already alone like more than 120 hours of gameplay.
Exactly. Yeah,
It's,
exactly.
for sure. So let's focus.
Definitely recommend people pick up the Legendary Edition of Mass Effect and just work your way through it because, it's a world like that's less kind of fantasy than Horizon games, but
Mhm.
it's still a great science fiction world that, and the allies and the people you meet and the motivations they have, and just really a great single player experience.
It really is. So let's talk about the retro side of the fence. Like,
Sure.
what retro games do you think, like, especially on the single player side of the fence, what retro games would you recommend to people to really check
Right.
out?
Yeah. Like I said, Mule or really any of the games by Dan Bunton, then known as Dan
Mhm.
Bunton, then transitioned to Danny Buntonberry. And what's funny is Danny Bunton was maybe one of the strongest promoters of online gaming at a time where, like I said, it was super rare. Like she did games like Mule, where you did couch play, and then she did a couple of great single player experiences too, like Seven Cities of Gold, where you're told by the king of Spain to like go to the new world and like gather riches, and you sail across and you land in the new world, and you're like trying to deal with the natives, and you're trying to exploit things, and you can play the game the way you feel like. You can just conquer the natives, or you can try to trade with them and, come to a kind of a peaceful, coexistence with them.
Mhm.
And then Heart of Africa was another great single player game of hers, where you're in the continent of Africa and you're again exploring it and trying to deal with the people there, and whether or not you're going to go, if you're going to exploit or cooperate and coexist with. A couple of great games. And then she actually went into more multiplayer and came out with a couple of the first multiplayer games that like you could play 4 people online and stuff like that. Really
Mhm.
helped pioneer that whole aspect of it. But her single player games are really good too. I'd definitely recommend them.
Oh, that's good. What retro console do you think has the best catalog of
Right.
games like
Well,
for single players?
right. Well, I always say my favorite retro game console has to be the ColecoVision.
Oh, really?
Because the Atari VCS kind of set the market. There were other consoles before that, but this is the one that really took off in the public's imagination and became synonymous with video games. Right? Atari was
Mhm.
at the time. If your mother was saying, you're on your video games too much, you say you're on Atari too much, right? No matter what the console. But I'd have to say the ColecoVision was, because it was the games they made was heavily relied on arcade transitions, but the adaptations they made of the games in the arcade was as amazing. Like there's, you look at it and you see a lot of problems. It's not quite a perfect translation from arcade to console, but at the time it was astounding. Like this closest you could get to the arcade at home were playing ColecoVision games. They had great graphics and great audio, and the gameplay was really good. And they were heavily influenced Nintendo when they went to, the whole industry crashed in 83, 84, and video games just went whoosh and just disappeared. And a
Mhm.
couple of years later, 85, 86, Nintendo came along with the NES and saved it. But I'd have to say my favorite console is the ColecoVision, and there's great games like Space Panic was a great adaptation on the ColecoVision. There was a lot. My mind's blanking right now.
Yeah, it's
The Smurf game was hilarious to play. Ladybug Venture was an amazing single player experience on the ColecoVision. Just your little guy going through all these different mazes with monsters chasing you, and you're trying to gather these treasures. And it was great stuff. It was really, at the time where if you wanted the video game experience, arcade experience, you have to go feeding quarters into these machines. Have the ColecoVision and just play them all at home. And
Mhm.
it's super. That's best the translations as you can get of those games at the time.
Yeah. How hard is it to find a ColecoVision right now?
I don't think it's very hard, and I don't think the ColecoVision, prices of every year prices of retro video game systems seem to go up, up, up. But I think the ColecoVision is not. They made this. It was a huge seller. Like not as big as the Atari, but they sold really well. There's quite a few of them that were made. So I think there's quite a few that are available you can get at. So I couldn't even imagine what the prices are. Maybe, I don't know, $150 maybe.
That's not too bad.
Yeah.
That's
something
not
like
too bad.
that.
So with the style of like indies really popping off and really having a lot of like retro flair to them, do you really feel like the indie game market is picking up where retro games kind of left off? Like everything moved to that 3D model now, and now a lot of stuff is leaning more towards retro in the indie landscape. How do you feel about the representation of indies now?
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. Like, look at a game like Minecraft, which
Hmm.
was, probably still is, the most successful video game ever created. And it's just, blocky graphics, right? What was the big thing of Atari and ColecoVision? It's blocky graphics, but then all of a sudden blocky graphics became the thing to do because again, you shape this world. Minecraft just gave you an incredible amount of impact on the world, right?
Hmm.
Just from the first time where you go into the game and you're just punching the hell out of a tree trying to get wood, right? And you take the
Hmm.
wood and you make a house, and then the house has all its, you got to do windows and doors and a second floor, and you get sucked into this world, and it's all just blocky graphics.
So, really wanted to talk to you about the retro landscape as far as recommendations for the NES. What some games you think people should definitely check out if they wanted to like dive into that catalog?
Right. Well, definitely the old standards on the NES, like Super Mario Brothers, like
Hmm.
incredible. Like it's neat to me thinking about Super Mario Brothers, where you get this game and you start playing it, and like there's a funny joke where that first mushroom Koopa that comes onto the screen is like the biggest mass murderer in video game history because people start and they go, "Huh? What am I supposed to do?" And the thing just kills you, right? How many Marios has it killed? Right?
Over the years, basically.
Right. The greatest mass murder in video game history. But you start this game and you see a static screen right at the beginning of Super Mario Brothers. Like Mario appears and the guy's coming towards you, and it just looks like it's another platform game, right?
Hmm.
And there's a little platform there, and it looks like, oh, I'm just going to be a platform game. And then you move to the right, and the whole world starts unfurling in front of you, right?
Hmm.
And you run and you jump over and you go up things, and just moving to the right and then just seeing the world open up like that. It's not a single screen anymore. You're running across this entire world, and then you get to the end and you go into another one. That's an amazing experience, just to see how shocked people must have been when they started playing that. And of course, the other one is Link, right? The Zelda games,
Hmm.
because just an amazing concept of adventure in those games, just discovery and adventure and finding new things. And definitely those two are ones you've got to play if you want to get a sample of the system that the video game landscape had cratered in 83, 84. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with video games anymore, and Nintendo just you know a ballsy move just said, we've got a great console here, we've got big success in Japan, so with the Famicom, and we're going to bring that to North America. We'll retool it. We'll make it kind of look like a VHS machine where you slide the thing into the front and put the lid down. So it
Hmm.
kind of fool people into thinking, no, it's not a video game, right? It's an entertainment system. And they had a little robot, Rob, that they sold with it because Teddy Ruxpin and all those kind of little robots. Tomy had robots and stuff like that. So it was sort of a Trojan horse where they're going to bring video games back to North America, as a robot. It's a little robot that plays with you, right?
Hmm.
So definitely those two games are standards on the NES that people probably should check out and just see how good Nintendo was it save the entire industry on the backs of these games.
That's really cool. So, you mostly play like a mixture between modern and retro. What retro game do you find yourself going back to play the most?
Right. I find that pretty much I'm going to think about this one. Like I said, if I'm firing up an arcade emulator, I'm going to be going right to elevator action because it's something about that. It's like a action and puzzle game mixed together. I really like. I would also play the Ultimate games are a lot of fun to play. I find myself going back to like 3, 4, and 5 are like probably some of the best RPG games, of that era.
Hmm.
Just again, building a great world where there's quite a bit of interaction and hidden stuff and, places to explore, and those are really great. So, and everything from EA in that period, right? It's funny looking at EA.
Yeah, who they are now versus
Yeah,
then.
exactly. That's exactly right. Like, I always think of the great quote from Batman where it's like, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And that's what's going on with these companies like Activision and Electronic Arts, where they started. Activision was a response to, like, there was a bunch of guys at Atari that were making the top Atari games. And one day they looked at it and they go, we're responsible for like 60% of the sales for Atari. They made $100 million last year. So we're like 60 million making for this company. And they won't even put our names on the box. So they're like, we'll go off and do our own thing. And we're going to show how important the actual designers of these games are. And it's the same thing with EA. They wanted to, Trip Hawkins founded it. He wanted to make people who made video games into superstars, and put their names and bios on the box and package video games, in copying the music industry, making records, and, buying a video game as cool as buying a record. And now Activision is the Call of Duty factory, and EA is making sports games. It's like, NHL 15, NHL 16. We made the puck a little faster, or we give you another check, right? Like every year, you're supposed to buy a new version of it. So they've come a long way. I expect a company to try to make money, but it's just I think they've moved quite a ways from being pioneers in the industry to just being kind of what the problem is in the industry.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So I got one last question for you.
Sure.
If Kirby absorbed you, what kind of power would he get?
I think he would probably get a really great skill in researching.
Oh, really?
It's not visually, exciting, but just one thing I do over and over again is just researching these systems and absorbing all this information and then trying to put it out in a kind of relating it interestingly to people and visually too, trying to capture the era in which these games were developed and the people who developed them. So he's going to become a really awesome researcher.
Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. Any tips for anyone who really wants to get into like the research landscape?
Yeah, well, it definitely takes a lot of skill, like in organization. That's really, Kirby's going to be super organized if he absorbs me, right? Because you need to cite everything, every piece of information you get. You can't rely on just one source. You've got to get multiple sources and then cite everything so everybody can follow your research, what you're doing. And reaching out to the people that were involved and the experts in the field right now. I recommend that people just do that. Just be curious, intellectually curious, and just reach out and all the information you get, correlate it together, and then just see if it makes sense and then go from there.
That sounds good. Well, before we go, I got to ask you, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, well, you can go to my website. It's thedoteaters.com. And like I said, I've got a big, long range of history from pre-Pong to the NES and everything in between and all the great computer companies of the era. And then on YouTube, you can see my YouTube channel that I operate with a partner. It's called Hunterwick, and it's a lot of popular videos on popular culture and little skits and stuff like that. So I'd invite people to check that out.
Sounds good. So, Bill, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'd love to have you back. So anytime you feel like you want to come back, just hit me up. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Sebastion. I appreciate it.
Sounds good. Well, until next time, peace. So that's a wrap for today's show. I want to give a special shout out to Bill Hunter. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. So, what did you think about today's episode? I thought Bill gave a nice mixture of retro games and modern games that you should consider adding to your video game backlog list. If you want me or my community of gamers to give you feedback on your video game backlog list, then join us in the Single Player Experience Discord server. Once you're in, feel free to share your video game backlog list or just simply talk about good single-player game experiences that you've had lately. The link to join those will be in the show notes. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope to catch you in the next one. In the meanwhile, stay up. Don't let the world get you down. Until next time, peace.